Houston, Texas medical examiner's office is ruling the death of Migos rapper Takeoff a homicide. An autopsy reveals he died from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. The shooting bringing attention once again to the number of hip-hop artists killed in gun violence.
Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. If you want the truth, don't close your eyes.
There's several things that come to mind. First, rest in peace to Takeoff. My condolences and energy, even more, not even more so, but in conjunction with his friends and his family, his loved ones. You know, Quavo had to see that. You know, Quavo had to see his partner. The Migos have been out for like making music for 14 years. And to see your friend laid out like that, that's very traumatic. You know, so there's multiple stories that I'm hearing from people in the Fifth Ward and all of that. The reality is, this ain't got nothing to do with those particular artists and the man that lost his life. This has more to do with this thought process that has been fostered by executives in media and just a culture in general, a culture of degradation. And this is not Black culture. I think it's fostered this reality that the way that you solve these problems is with firearms, and it is not. As a firearms instructor, I am the first person to tell everybody, get out of there.
All in all, I mean, one of the sad and unfortunate facts is that homicide is the leading cause of death for young Black males between the ages of 15 and 24. So for young men in that demographic, of the ones who pass away, about 50% of them die via homicide. That rate is exponentially higher than that for any other group. And in fact, the Black homicide victimization rate is so high that it literally cannot be graphed on the same graph with that for whites. So it's the leading cause of death for young Black men and the second leading cause of incarceration for Black men. And it's unfortunate that we try to paper over these facts and we try to step over it and say, oh, what about white on white crime? And crime takes place within the community, but we are at epidemic level rates of homicide. And I'm not talking about a difference in kind. This is a difference in degree. I'm talking about a difference in kind. Like, this is an entirely different problem. So as I said, I think it's tragic for his family. But I do think that there are larger conversations to be had in terms of culture, those norms, those beliefs, those behaviors that any group of people sort of accept as normal, right? Like, this is how we settle disputes.
Well, I don't follow rap too closely, but I did see that come up in the news, and it feels, it's horrible to say this, but it feels inevitable. You feel like you have just this cascade of murders happening in a community that glorifies murder. And we can get into all of this, as we talk, but we have very destabilized, very broken neighborhoods. They're not the majority. They're not the majority of Black people. The majority of Black people live in the suburbs. The majority of Black people are middle class. 80% of Black people are not poor. They're not growing up in the deep inner city poverty that we think of. And even for those who are growing up in the deep inner city poverty that we think of, they're not necessarily a part of the problem, right? There's a small percentage of people causing a lot of suffering. And so there's a lot of subtleties to how we analyze this issue. But when you hear about these killings, it just feels like there goes another one. And it feels so, you can feel helpless. It's tragic. It's so tragic that we're in the place we're in now with this level of violence.
Sad. Sad for another a young man losing his life far earlier than it should be. And also sad because these incidents no longer surprise or shock me in the way that I wish that they did. He's not the first. This has been going on for years, for decades at this point. It's the same cycle, rinse and repeat, the same reactions, in this age of social media, the same things, the same outpourings, people saying, oh, this needs to be stopped. This is senseless. Why is this going on? This is not fair. We need to do something about this. And then it passes over within a few days and people are back to talking and rapping about killing each other and promoting it and pushing it and playing it everywhere in the world and consuming it and streaming it to the tunes of billions and billions and billions of listens, putting it all over the charts. And then a few months pass, happens again. Another young artist, let me not even say artist, let me say rapper, because this is rappers that it's happening to. This isn't happening to singers or people of other genres. And the cycle just repeats and it repeats and it repeats. And honestly, it feels like it's been like that for my entire life.
My first reaction is I had a nigga reaction. And it was finding out that it happened at a dice game, like it happened organically. You know what I'm saying? Like the people didn't set out to be like, oh, he's there, let's go get him. It wasn't malicious intent. If you watch like the Boondocks, they talk about things like a nigga moment.
Webster defines the nigga moment as a moment when ignorance overwhelms the mind of an otherwise logical Negro male.
Right. And so that's my first thought was, at least it was like a nigga moment and it wasn't done maliciously as a black man set out to go and hunt down another black man. Just nigga shit happened in the nigga moment. And I was ashamed that was the first thing that I thought, you know what I'm saying? And usually I would never put my true first thought out in public, but I thought it was really important to make sure, like in this situation, in this circumstance, that we are being as genuinely honest as we can be about what living in these conditions has done to us, what kind of bruises it has left on us, what kind of mental thinking is still in us, even when we're grown and we've moved out and done better with our lives and raised our own families. That initial thing that was put into us from being raised in one of these dominantly progressive Black areas, it stays with you no matter how much you grow and no matter how much better you get. And you're just expected to just keep going and not even, you have your moment, you pour out your liquor, but then you go about your business. And that's not the way that we should operate. But if we went into mourning every single time we had one of these situations, we wouldn't get about the life of living either. So we have to remember, as people who've made it out, who did the proverbial pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, that us doing that and achieving that has not changed the conditions of where we came from. And a lot of the residual bruising that we have from being raised in those areas is really, really fresh to the people who are still there.
I do think that in many communities, they have become, this type of outcome is expected. What makes it even sadder than that, because a lot of us grow up in neighborhoods, I'm an East Coast kid. I grew up in New York. I got friends from Philly and DC. My wife's from Houston. So a lot of us grow up in and around big cities. So this type of thing is not foreign to us. And what makes it frustrating is that when you look at particularly the Black leadership class, the politicians, the pundits, the professors, the preachers, and the performers, the people I call the Afrostocracy, these people will not touch these issues with a 10-foot pole. And the only reason that you and I heard about Takeoff's death is because he's famous.
for me, when someone passes away, the first thing that I think of is, oh my God, his mother. Oh my God, his daughter. Oh my God, his son, his family, his friends. Like, because for me, death is excruciatingly painful. So my heart just began to ache for the family. And then when I started to, then I did have to start finding out, like, who is this person and so forth and so on. Come to find out, he was the one who was, the quiet one, the one in the back. He was never really trying to get into trouble. He was never involved in any mess. Then it made me even more upset, because I was like, I don't know if you can say he was an innocent bystander, because I'm not quite clear on exactly what happened. There's a couple of different rumors, but it sounds like he had no business being shot.
I think sometimes we can be a little confused when we say somebody got shot over a game of dice or over a pair of shoes. I think it goes a lot deeper than that. That's the surface, like, what's the word? That's like the surface catalyst. It's like the catalyst for what caused the conflict. But I think what we have to take into account is that there is so much trauma and so much anger that is right below the surface, so that when little things happen, it can sort of explode into something that seems insane from the perspective of someone who doesn't have that level of trauma and anger.
It's tragic in that it's indicative of a larger microcosm of what's going on in the Black community. I know not all rappers rap about violence, not all of them are about that life, but there are a lot who are. And at some point, you have to wonder, when is this going to stop? Is there a way that people can kind of encourage a more healthy way of promoting their music and promoting the message that they want to send?
Well, how many country singers is getting killed every other month or every other week? How many rock star people are going over there to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles and being shot up with their girlfriend? How many house music producers and creators are getting shot up as they stand outside or walking down the street talking on the phone to their baby mama or something like that? I mean, the answer is in the pudding. The truth of the matter is that there is something. And, the good book says that your tongue, the words that you use, will not return unto you void, meaning they are going to return to you with the same fever and fervor that you sent them out with. And so in the hip hop community, there is too much death coming out of your mouth. And so that is going to return, it's got to go somewhere. You can't just say stuff and just think it's going to be okay. So, we didn't have as much death amongst the same genre, okay? We didn't have as much death amongst the same genre in the R&B, when we had all the way from Marvin Gaye to Faith Evans. We didn't have a lot of this internal genre homicide going on with Earth, Wind, and Fire and Isley Brothers. I mean, you see what I'm saying? So something you cannot just ignore, that something within the hip hop community is causing this problem.
Yeah, this is hood classic. This the same soundtrack that got the hood acting strong on my rappers. Got me feeling like I'm sure rapping. Everybody rapping what they pay me, cause I'm good at it. Stuck inside my wheels, boy, I been suffering from hood habits. About to get the video, they complaining about the foot traffic. Can't get the words past me. If the jams don't do it, then the hood grab them. Bible read salads got me looking like I took classes. Both hands, book savvy, black eye, look at me walking out the...
That's a good question. I think that there are a lot of different things that go into culture in general. I mean, you've got traditions, you've got music, you've got food, customs, vernacular, the way people speak. So I think when it comes to, I guess, specifically Black Americans who descend from slaves, I mean, you've got the music, you've got the jazz, rock, hip hop, blues, all that. You also have the shared experience that a lot of our ancestors went through. You've got the history. History is a very important part of any culture, and Black Americans have a very rich history in America. I don't think Black culture is inherently violent. The vast majority of Black people don't engage in what we call Black on Black crime, right? The vast majority of Black men don't. But there is a subset.
That is a great question. I don't have a single definition. When I think about Black culture, I think about a huge quilt with different fabrics and textures and patches, and you know what I mean, that stretches across the country. I think of you know, obviously the people whose ancestors have been here for 400 plus years, right? Part of that story is chattel slavery, is emancipation, is reconstruction, is all the things that we learn in school, but it's more than that. It's the business districts, it's the Rosenwald schools, it's ex-slaves who helped raise money to educate their own kids in what we would now call segregated schools, but the kids were learning. Black culture is obviously part of American culture. I am not a keeper of Black culture. I would do away with much of the Black Cultural Border Patrol because I think they police for the wrong things. But it's one of those things where at this point, when I say Black culture, I'm talking about the set of norms and values and standards that Black people from across the country understand and get, and which resonate with us.
And so when we talk about the problems in Black culture now, a lot of what we're talking about is only 50 years old, right? These are problems that have arisen since 1970, okay? And that's when you're seeing the fallout from all of this social engineering kind of intervention. And so what I would love to see Black people do is reclaim their incredibly positive legacy of Black culture in America. You know, the amazing music, right? The amazing contributions to literature and art. I mean, Black music, besides classical music, Black music is the only music the whole world listens to, right? I don't listen to Chinese pop music, right? But everybody listens to Black music, you know? And so it's been incredibly influential. And what's happened is that we've just lost the cohesion.
That's a fantastic question. I'd actually be hesitant to define such a thing because I think it's too broad. It's actually too broad. I think that within Black American culture, you have tons of subcultures, which I guess you could say, you know, if you amalgamate those things, it creates an overall culture. But I'm hesitant to use a term like Black American culture or Black culture just because I'm aware that there are 40 million Black Americans who have a range of cultures amongst them and very different beliefs and behavioral systems and so on. So it's kind of, 40 million people, that's basically that's a nation. I mean, that's a nation pretty much in terms of number of people. So I'd be hesitant to just kind of like blanket and just say, oh, you know, Black culture is X, because I'm totally aware that the aspects and elements of the subcultures of Black American culture that I think promote and cause, or at least make certain things like this, what we're talking about, more likely, are not the things that I believe most Black American people are engaging in or approve of. It's more of like a subculture of a subculture. And then let alone Black culture as a whole, because I mean, if you're talking about Black people, there's like, I don't know, probably about 1 billion Black people in the entire world. So if someone just says Black culture, I'm certainly like, what on earth does that even, what does that even mean? Because that's just way too broad.
The music is a part. Hip hop, African Americans twice in American history created an art form that did not exist before we created it. First it was jazz, And second, it was hip hop. They did not exist to that, like the way that they are now until we made them. And when they first started out, if you take jazz for a second, you got the Duke Ellingtons, you got the Coltranes, you got the, Louis Armstrongs, you got the, those guys, you Paul Robersons, just women too. Now you got like, and I'm not dissing him, but like the white dude, Michael Bolton, like that's not really jazz. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have respect for jazz and that the culture and things like that, but it's not the same. So it's a bastardized version of what, that real. It's not the pure uncut, And so same thing with hip hop. When we created this art form that had all of these elements of a culture, hip hop, MCing, breakdancing, graffiti, DJing, these were components of a culture. The artists now don't even know how to fucking graffiti, which was a part of a culture. So they extracted certain things and left others and added additives to them that were very damaging. The reason why I'm, again, more leaning on the executives, because these executives have financial interests in other things, like the prison industrial complex. So when you step back from it and go, they're not just saying, let the artists express their reality. They're also fully aware, this will increase my bottom line over here. Because again, everyone keeps saying the music business isn't profitable anymore like that. No, because it's not as profitable for artists on a label. But if I get you in a 360 deal and I squeeze you that way, and you're in a town where you're in Texas, where I may take stock in hospitals and we're gonna promote you sipping lean, because that was a thing for a very long time, because I'm gonna get some more money on the back end over there. See, like people not looking at the investment strategy of this shit. If I was a supervillain, I would do the same thing. So I get that they take a part of a culture, extrapolate the pieces that are necessary, and add things that are necessary for their interest.
So where do you want to start this conversation? Because any aspect negative about hip hop that you want to start as a conversation, I would start with some kind of political merger in Black America that brought us to the point that that's what's visual in our culture. It is a counterculture. The culture we were pushed into was like we're coming off like the Harlem Renaissance, and that's that culture. What is that culture? That culture is progressivism mixing with the culture. That's that mixture that got that Renaissance. In order for you to have a Renaissance, you have to have both the culture and the intellectual rebirth happening simultaneously. So if they had a Harlem Renaissance, that means that they had some successful shit happening simultaneously. What did they have happening simultaneously? A hook on the culture, as far as it comes from storytelling to the poetry to the music, and the intellectual change where you had a lot of the Black intellectuals taking over, pushing into the NAACP, trying to get a foothold in a Democratic Party because they like the idea of progressivism. And that's what that merger was, that progressivism intellect merging with the culture.
Well, I mean, as an art form, I think the art itself is very positive. I mean, I think it's great what Black Americans have been able to create in this country. I mean, going back to even the days of the slaves, I mean, our musical contributions to this country have been significant, and it's permeated the rest of American culture. You go to a rap concert, you're going to see, in some cases, mostly white people there going along to the music. So I think it's been great as a way to kind of bring people together and have that be a part of the overall American culture. It's even pervaded into other countries as well. I think that in a lot of cases, especially when hip hop first started, it did have a very strong message. It didn't necessarily glorify violence, but it chronicled the violence that was happening in these communities. And the people that were making that music were essentially complaining about it, saying there has to be a better way. I want to get out of this, And then you also had the other side where that glorified it. That'd be one of the more negative aspects. But I do think that there's a lot of positive messages that are sent through hip hop. I mean, even as it pertains to capitalism, as a conservative, I'm all about the free markets and capitalism. You listen to Jay-Z and you listen to some of these other rappers, and that's what they're talking about. And really that is a message that should be sent to especially young Black men.
And then you also have like what is considered cool. And we have to be real, we have to be honest. And there is, violence is glorified in a lot of hip hop music, right? It's glorified, and it's considered cooler, to rap about killing Black people specifically, because it's not just killing people, right? It's killing N-words, right? It's killing Black, right? Rapping about robbing and stabbing and shooting Black people is so normalized. I mean, it's a multi-billion dollar industry. And again, there's two questions here. People always ask, especially me being an artist, people always ask me, why do rappers make that type of music? And that's a good question. But I think a better question is, why do so many people like it? Right? Why is it getting billions and billions of streams, right? Why is it getting hundreds of millions of streams? Why is it topping the Billboard charts, right? It's supply and it's demand, right? Why is McDonald's the most popular restaurant in the world? Is it because they make the best food? Certainly not. So I think that we also need to be honest as a society and as consumers and say, man, like what is it within us that draws us to this violent content? And also, where's the dividing line between entertainment and reality? Especially with a genre like hip hop, these lines are so blurry. All right. The line between reality and entertainment, it's really, really blurry. I think that's why when it comes to things even like movies or perhaps even video games, it's easier for people's brains to just kind of put that straight in the entertainment category.
We can have diss songs, we can have battles and disagreements, but the way we've always looked at it in hip hop is that we keep that on wax, that it stays on the record, it stays in the music, and we understand that that's where it belongs, and then you had Tupac and Biggie come along, and there's other artists you could talk about that died before that, but again, a lot of that was, you know what I'm saying? It was street shit. It was nigga moments that happened. And we all know nigga moments happen. That's what it was. But what we saw with Biggie and Pac was progressive entertainment media, because there is no conservative entertainment. Where is your conservative entertainment media? Where is the entertainment media that is run by the right wing? So before we're getting into Biggie and Pac and this fight and this battle, we were coming off of like, look at our communities, look at what we're doing at ourselves, of being very, very self-reflective. That was the period that came before the verses, you know what I'm saying? And that's what gets us distracted. That's what took us away from looking at the righteous voices amongst us, from looking at the logical, economically based voices amongst us.
And so, you have many flourishing Black middle-class people. I don't want to ignore that, right? Black doesn't equal poor. Black doesn't equal violent. We're talking about specific inner city situations of poverty with very similar pathologies to Appalachian white poverty, right? It looks a little different because one is concentrated and one is dispersed, right? So they look different, but otherwise they have a lot of the same issues. And so I don't consider that Black culture. That's not Black culture. There's a certain criminal inner city element that has its own culture, but that doesn't make it Black culture. The Black church, Black music, the National Negro Business League, that's Black culture. And I want to reclaim that for Black people.
The violence exists because the conditions for violence exist. You want to stop it? Then change the conditions for violence. I'm not going to pretend those conditions don't exist. And matter of fact, y'all don't even pretend those conditions don't exist. Y'all run through Philly taking pictures of what it looks like on a lot of the streets down there and what kids have to walk to on their way to school. Y'all do it in San Francisco. Y'all do it in Chicago. Y'all understand the conditions that exist. The conditions for violence exist, and the music didn't make it happen. Legislation did. Regulation did. Taxation did. Progressivism did. So until you reverse engineer those things, don't complain to me about the music.
I don't think that Black families in the inner city suddenly decided in 1970 that they're not going to get married anymore. Why? That's ridiculous, right? That you wouldn't just see a sudden shift in a community like that had 89% in wedlock births up until 1960. That doesn't make any sense, right? Why are you, if you see a sudden shift like that that's across the whole community, you've got to ask yourself what's going on there. There's got to be something top down, right? And I think that the United States government, influenced a lot by some very eugenicist ideas in the early 20th century, had a social, and this is the progressive mindset, is the social engineering mindset.
Progressivism. In all honesty, that's the root cause of everything. This sick ideology that has invaded our communities and has been in our communities since the early 1900s. And slowly but surely, it has taken every single bit of Black wealth. It has taken every single bit of any kind of Black individuality and tried to meld us into people of color, into minorities, into this some other group than what we are, especially as descendants of slaves, especially as freemen. We can act like we've never built. We can act like we've never grown. We can act like we've never dominated. We did those things in the face of white supremacy. Like we did those things in the face of the KKK. I'm not talking about, the good boys club. No, I'm talking about literally burning crosses on your lawn, lynching you from a tree, like real. You're not going to that voting booth because we're gonna take sniper shots as you approach it. You know what I'm saying? Like real. We built, grew, developed, and prospered in the face of white supremacy, and they don't want to tell that story.
I think nowadays, with the advent of progressivism, it has focused more on the government, and the Democrats took advantage of that, and they enacted policies designed to get really all Americans hooked on the government, but it disproportionately impacted the Black community. And since the Republicans back then weren't trying to offer a real alternative, you got Black people mainly supporting Democrats and progressive politicians, thinking that they had their best interests at heart, but in reality, they didn't.
So you remove our history, you implement progressive policy that is not designed to recognize any of that history that you just removed. So you're not talking about growth. You're not talking about ownership. You're not talking about equity, the things that built us the Black Wall Street. Now we're talking about what can we get from government, having government come in and be our partner, having government have its regulatory hands to make sure we are seen as equal and calling that equity. So you have this whole bastardization in their ideology that has changed the very core of everything that made us great in this country towards what you see now in death, poverty, and destruction. And if we see that and we recognize that, they changed the flag over to Tuskegee. They removed the ideology of conservatism and now replaced it with progressivism. We've seen 100 years of that. What are the results? Is that still what we want? And having a very, very honest assessment about that, and especially if we're looking at the Republican or the right, understanding that and taking their portion of accountability in that, to be able to go back into these areas and reverse engineer what progressivism has done.
Obviously, we know the stats in terms of not just the higher homicide victimization rate, but in terms of who, if a young Black man is killed in New York City, it's most likely that the person who killed him looks just like him. But the problem is, in our community, we place ourselves, as it relates to our role in the criminal justice system, as primarily victims of a racist system, as opposed to victims of violent crime. So our sympathies are always with the criminals more so than the victims. And that's why people don't ask questions, you'll hear about mass incarceration. And I hate euphemisms, I hate terms like that. But again, when you dig into the data, you see on a state level, There are more black men in prison for murder, just murder, than all drug crimes, both possession and distribution on a state level, than all drug crimes. So it's much easier to run on ending white supremacy. It's much easier to run on dismantling systemic racism. It's much easier to run on, we're going to hold police accountable. We're going to reimagine policing and so on and so forth. Those messages are easier to run on politically. They're easier to fundraise on because they keep the enemy, quote unquote, being whiteness, systemic racism, and white supremacy. And that is a convenient target.
And so in my book, Black Liberation Through the Marketplace, one of the things that I address is just the cascade of state interventions that created these ghettoized, isolated communities. It's not just the Federal Housing Administration's redlining, that's part of the story, but it's also the way that the highways were built and built right through Black economic and Latino economic centers, main streets, things that had been built up over time.
And what are they complaining about? In hip hop, the first generation in New York, what are they complaining about? That the neighborhoods are dirty, the schools are failing, there is no jobs, we're being over policed. You know what I'm saying? The system is not working for us. Okay, well, what fucking system were they talking about? The system that was present in New York City. What just happened in New York City? Progressivism promised all of these benefits, almost bankrupted the entire damn city. All of the benefits were pulled away, and all of the people who had been taught to be dependent upon those benefits had them pulled away and found themselves shit out of luck.
I mean, remember, between 1948 and 1960, Black poverty is more than halved. It goes down from like 87% to 41%. And why is that? Well, partially it's because there's a big boom happening in the 50s, but the other reason is because you have stable families, you have a ton of emphasis on education, and you have everybody going to church. So they've got these great social networks. People are in good shape. Black people were in good shape in spite of all of the terrible obstacles they'd had to face. And then when they started building those fraternal associations and those main streets with their businesses, here comes the highway, right through the center. Eminent domaining the crap out of everybody's property rights and destroying these cultural centers. And right at the same time, urban renewal, right? That James Baldwin called Negro removal. And people's houses are being taken away. Am I going to be able to reconstitute my whole culture and community being scattered out of my neighborhood? That's going to be really, really hard to do. And then we talk about, the kinds of really perverse incentives of the welfare state, right? So we could stack all these things on top of each other and see you've got neighborhoods that are ghettoized and isolated as a result of a cascade of state interventions, and it has caused a kind of cultural breakdown that we're seeing.
What would have happened if an opposition force had shown up and listened to what hip hop was saying? But they didn't. So you get a second generation of hip hop. Second generation of hip hop comes from Los Angeles. Now these niggas a little bit more uppity, right? The LA side, they're a little bit more uppity. They're not writing in analogies and similes and shit. No, fuck the police. Like now you got them being uppity about it. They're not complaining about it. They're like, we're gonna do this full force. But this is the second generation of them trying to tell you that there's a fucking problem. In this generation, you go, oh, that's gang culture. What were they telling you? The communities are dirty. There are no jobs. The schools are failing. There's no economic opportunity. The police have their boot on our fucking necks. What are they telling you? They're telling you progressivism sucks. They're telling you they don't like the ideology that they are living under. Do you see it as that? No, you see it as another reason to look at, to judge, to ridicule, and to finger point. Instead of seeing that that is a constituency that is saying, if you bring us an option, if you bring us a choice, we would be open to it because we don't like what we have now.
So, right. So you're still dealing with the fallout of everything that the state did, which makes it really hard to overcome. But the point is that our current problem has morphed right into that loss of civil society. And I think it's important to take that into account, because conservatives don't always want to tell the whole truth about the things that the state did to cause our problems in our inner cities. But sometimes they can be right in some sense about what we need to do now, right? In terms of building up families, building up fathers, building the church back up, building up those institutions that are going to be a resource for people to actually move up economically. You have very high levels of fatherlessness, very high levels of crime, very low levels of employment and education, right? And so you got to tell the whole story. There's no way to talk about what's going on right now without giving the background on how it got this way for this portion of the population.
I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no.
Ultimately, the biggest part of it, and I'm thinking downrange at least 1 to 2 generations, has to be reconstituting and strengthening the Black family. We cannot get around that, which means we need to get more comfortable talking about marriage. When I say that, I'm defining one man and one woman for one lifetime, committed to one another, and all the fruit that come from that relationship. So talking about that and the nuclear or natural family. If we are not willing to start there, everything else is going to be limited in its effectiveness, because ultimately kids are not born into a community or a school or a government office. They're born into a family.
These communities are not in any way loving their own family members. If you want to hear how some of these women speak to their children, it would make you want to regurgitate. It is absolutely horrific the way a lot of these women yell at their children. They cuss their children out at the store. It is just terrible. There is no love coming from the fathers who have either abandoned the house because they were pushed out, or abandoned the house because they wanted to leave. But when there's no place to run and get love and advice. If your mom is doing this, you can't run to your daddy. If your daddy's doing this, you can't run back to your mommy. There's no place where there is love unconditional. Because like Bernie Mac said in his stand-up, Big Mama gone.
She ain't no grandmama. Remember Big Mama? See, Big Mama gone. So you're a grandmama now, what, you 24? Great grandmama 36.
You used to be able to go to Big Mama house and get some love. You get some good to eat. Baby, what's the matter? Come in. This all right. Go and wash your face. You're going to be all right. You're going to sleep here tonight. So forth and so on. Well, you don't have that. You are just stuck in a place where there is no unconditional love.
You know, I would say there's a few different issues. I mean, especially culturally, and I'm not talking about Black culture. I'm talking about the culture that exists in the places where this stuff is happening. You've got rampant fatherlessness. I mean, most people who grow up without a father don't commit crimes. They go on to live normal lives. But the people who do commit crimes of that subset, most of them grow up without fathers in the home or otherwise. And again, that's not a black or white thing. If you were to poll white inmates, you'd find out that most of them didn't have fathers. So I think that's an issue. I think widespread poverty contributes to it. I think that lack of education also contributes to it. If you look in these areas, they all have the same thing. They have high poverty, substandard education. They've got crime going on. You've got the fact that so many people get locked up, and then when they get out of jail, they end up going back because they don't always have the recourse that they need to build a better life. I mean, you've got that felony on your record. You're not going to get a job. You're not going to get housing. You're not going to be able to attend university. So it's this cycle full of different factors that contribute to these high crimes. I mean, how many times have you heard a Black person say, you know, I was selling drugs because I felt like there was no other recourse. There was no other way to make money. Now, that's not true. But when you grow up in that environment, then that's what you end up thinking, because a lot of times you don't see outside of that. You don't see what's possible. I mean, I've talked to many Black people who have grown up in that way. And when they were taken out of it, that made it easier for them to see, okay, maybe I do have other options.
And almost all the issues that you see, when you see 12-year-olds out in Philadelphia beating a man over the head with a traffic cone at 2:30 in the morning, and the girls are like 13 years old, that's a family issue. Your first step should not be, well, what government agency is responsible for X, Y, and Z?
But I feel like people want to do this kind of slacktivism where they sort of say the right things, put the right hashtags, hold up their sign, do whatever. But then when it comes to these difficult conversations and talking about culture and talking about what's actually being promoted on the radio, on the TV, through the music, on this and what young people are being influenced by and what they're considering cool, and the absence of fathers and the breakdown of family and personal no one wants to talk about any of that stuff, right? That now you're the bad guy just for bringing it up, you know? And it's like, well, that to me just makes it even more frustrating, because I think a lot of people sort of know the problem, but they're too worried about being politically correct or being called a certain name or this or that to actually want to have the discussion. And I personally believe that if you're not willing to have an open and honest discussion about a subject, even if it's difficult, even if it's emotional, even if it might trigger people, then you're never going to get a solution. And it's just going to keep happening over and over and over and over again. And like I said earlier on, you're just going to keep getting that cycle of, you know, oh, boom, it happens again. And everyone is sad. The RIPs go out on Twitter and on Instagram and whatever. And then again, a week later, people are back listening to music glorifying the murder of Black people. And rappers are rapping about killing other, and it just keeps going and going and going, and everyone keeps buying it, and it keeps getting. It's a real mess, man. It's a real mess. Music is not the core of it, but it's certainly, there's certain stuff that's out there that certainly is not helping. And I think the fact that music is even being made is reflective of deeper issues that are going on in certain cultures and communities.
I think the sticking point for a lot of conservatives is marriage. The marriage rate is very low in the Black community, whether you're in poverty or in the middle class. And I think so. How I explain this is I say that when you look at all of the things I've mentioned, right, redlining, highways, urban renewal, welfare state, there's other things, contraception shock, right? There's other reasons that you see a decline in marriage. The real story is that the Black community was hit first. They were hit first because they were the most vulnerable. They were the most economically vulnerable. And so they got hit first and their marriage rates started to drop. And then Hispanics, and then whites. So if you go back to Daniel Patrick Moynihan's famous document where he says, oh my gosh, you know, there's a 25% out of wedlock birth rate in Black America. White America's already passed that. We're in the 30s. Latinos are 50s. Black marriage rates have actually gone up. So you now have out of wedlock births at 70%. They had been a little higher. They're actually going down in the Black community. And we also want to remember that out of that group, there's a huge group of dads who do live with their kids, right? So they're not married to their moms, but that doesn't mean they're not there. So about 50% of Black kids do have a dad in the home. And Black dads actually tend to be more involved with their kids than white dads when it comes to things like feeding and cleaning and changing their diapers. That's just true. It's a cultural thing. They're more involved. And so I think a lot of conservatives are going to say, but look at fatherlessness, right? They're always talking about fatherlessness. And on the one hand, fatherlessness is really important. I am not disagreeing with them on that. It's incredibly important. On the other hand, let's get the numbers right. It's half, not 75%, right? It's half that are dealing without fathers, and it's happening in the whole country, right? So Blacks get hit first, and then Latinos, and then whites. The only group that hasn't gotten too bad is Asians at this point. They're at like 11%. Okay. And so what's the point? The point is it's happening. It's an American problem. It's our problem. It's not a Black problem. It's our problem. It's just that Black people got hit first. The same is true with the criminal justice system and with the drug war. You're going to hear about that stuff more from Black people because they are disparately affected. But it's an American problem. It affects everybody, right? Tony Tippa got killed too, and he's white, you know? And so we have to talk about these things as American problems and just understand that the Black community has been affected more or earlier than other communities, but that doesn't make it a Black thing.
We want to help you. We're from the government. Your homes are not modern enough. From our perspective, or our elders' perspective, we owned them. They were ours. We're going to put this project, important word, we're going to put this project right here and we're going to go, it's low income. It's actually more than what we were paying because we own these already. So even if it's $8 a month, I didn't pay $8 a month because my granny and my great grandfather and it was passed down. Yeah, okay, it might not be the best looking, but it's ours. It's our tight knit community. Eminent domain, cool, it's a project now. Now, in order for you to live in this project and get welfare, young lady, you better not have a man in the house. Now we literally looking at progressive policy that impacts fatherlessness in the house. Then no one's gonna disagree that 2 parents working together in a household on their children is better than 1. Now you got a mom stressing. Now you got a mom doing a bunch of stuff. She feels left. She starts to believe in this, I don't need no man concept because the government is Big Daddy. I'm paying you. I'm protection and provision. You call me, you know? So that's a policy that creates a reality. And now the young people that's in it is painting the picture.
Again, if we're going back to talking about it and you want to talk about family structure now, but your solution is to send more police in and lock more Black people up, what are you going to do with the future family structure? So you keep it's a matter of these conversations that they keep having that are not going to actually influence anything. Okay, so I'll ask you, what legislation are you going to pass that's going to change the family structure? And matter of fact, why don't you try that on white middle America and see if it works with them? And then you can bring it to us if you see tangible recoveries in what's happening with with white marriage across the Midwest. Because a lot of the same problems that once manifested themselves in our community are now manifesting themselves in their community. And if you got this all figured out as far as it pertains to us, then why aren't you able to stop it from happening under your nose to your own people in real time? It's almost like you don't have it figured out as you think you do. So again, if you want to talk about the family structure in white America, what will be the way to fix the family structure? They would tell you to stop fentanyl from coming in. They ain't telling you to send police in to arrest the people using the fentanyl. So take that exact example and use this to us. What are you talking about as far as our family structures? You want us to talk about it personally instead of being like, no, look at the system that was brought when they're sending fentanyl in yours and they send crack into ours. No, you want to talk about us. You want to talk to us about how to fix our families. Now, is there a conversation in Black America that we can be having to understand that structure? I would love to have that conversation. Matter of fact, what I would love to do is look at a lot of the people that are in the culture right now and what they think about marriage and what they think about legacy for their kids. So if we're looking at a Jay-Z, you know what I'm saying? And he got his queen. If we you know what I'm saying? So if we start going down the list and we look at how many people that are representative in the culture, they hate LeBron James. Look what he did with his family. You don't want to take that and use it as a role model for how Black families need to start adjusting themselves. You don't want to do that because it's LeBron James. So I don't think it's a serious conversation. I think it's a got you conversation that takes us off of actually looking at what can be done with policy in the political sphere if you get on the ground and you do it at the local level.
If you break down and disintegrate the family unit and family structures, then you're kind of on a timer until the dismantling and breakdown of the society overall. And, and I recognize and appreciate all the people out there, millions of parents, millions of people out there who are doing a fantastic job with all of this, and honestly are like holding society together, because that's really the glue of a society is the family. So for every parent who's doing that job with your mom, like, props to you. Like, honestly, no one ever says it, right? But like, props to you, because that's the most important job. And I think that's understated, because I think that well-raised children who grow up to be well-raised adults are the greatest asset that humanity has, right? And badly raised children who go on to be badly behaving adults create all the create all the problems, and it doesn't just affect that individual. Everything ripples outwards, right? It affects the wider community and the wider nation, right? If you've got someone who's going around just doing a ton of bad stuff, and like that affects everybody that they like it all. It's dominoes. It's dominoes. Just like you can do something positive and you can go out there with your platform and you can impact tens, hundreds of thousands of people, potentially millions of people. You can impact them in a positive way.
Conservatives are really good at analysis. They're not as good at action. Leftists are bad at analysis, but they're better at action. And so what we need to do is gain some of each other's virtues a little bit, trade virtues. I think that a lot of conservatives need to, for instance, if you're thinking about something like issues of fatherhood, and you're going on and on Twitter about what fatherlessness causes, I want to ask you, have you driven a kid to prison so he can see his dad? Are you mentoring a young dad who wants to take care of his kids but doesn't know where to start because he didn't have a dad? Are you mentoring a young kid whose dad isn't going to be around? What are you doing? Are you just wagging your finger at people, or are you offering them a solution? Because I think there's this assumption that people can just make a good choice, make a better choice, like get married, get a job, have kids, the success sequence everybody talks about, right? That they can do that with no mentorship. But that's not how any of us do it, right? Everybody in the middle class is achieving what we're achieving through mentorship. We have people who are offering us jobs. We have people who are building us up and training us and teaching us where to go next, right? Grad student mentors and job mentors. And we have people, we even have marriage classes in our churches, and we put the young couples with the older couples, right? We're doing all of this mentorship. And then we look at somebody in an isolated community that is terribly destabilized, and we say, why can't you make a good choice? It's insane. It's insane to me. It's like, no, you go in and be a mentor to somebody and help them walk through all the difficulties of making that choice, right? And help them to make that choice and to keep that commitment. And so I really challenge conservatives, black, white, or anything else, to put their energy and their time into a real person, and not just into being a keyboard warrior about what's wrong with poor communities.
Wanna be free, finally, I wanna be free, I wanna be free.
Well, they need therapy. And I don't mean that in a funny way. I really mean that these parents need therapy. When you don't, when you don't get your stuff fixed, you're going to have to spill it over onto something. And that is the children. So if you had the crack epidemic of the 80s, and the children of those crackhead parents are now parents, right? But they didn't get any therapy between 80 and 2022. Then you're going to have these children who were abused by either crackheads or crack dealers or gun violence or lack of this, lack of that, no this, no that, being toted back and forth to the grandparents' house. Maybe they had to go live down there from New York, but had to go live down in South Carolina for a little while, and then somebody died, and then you had to go over to Kentucky, and then So all of this is going on with no therapy. So now they have children. And again, when you don't have a visual example, then it's very hard for you to know what to do and how to do it. Do you see what I'm saying? So unfortunately, these people who are raising these kids that we're now dealing with these days, they weren't properly raised.
And so then you have to ask, well, what's causing the trauma and anger, right? Like, why is it that you can't just de-escalate or you can't do the risk assessment where you're thinking it's just not worth it, to get over this? So there's a lot of situations that could blow up like that, but they don't because people de-escalate it. And so I think what you have to go back and look at is these really big questions of family structure, of employment networks, of community involvement, like church, right? Those sorts of communities that are kind of training you up in virtue and teaching you self-control, and like fathers in the home, right? Who are disciplining you correctly, but loving you, doing it in a loving way. That's how people learn self-control. That's how people work through anger. That's how people get assistance for trauma. Not everybody in the same way, right? But all of us experience trauma of some kind. And some of us have a heck of a lot more to deal with than others. And the ones who have a lot more to deal with are often the ones who are the least equipped to address that.
So I think that, and I can even talk about the church as well. I mean, the Black church used to be very much involved in these things, and it still is to a large extent. But I'm not sure that churches are really exerting the level of influence that they need to in these communities. Sometimes it's because they just don't want to, or they don't care. And sometimes they just lack the resources to be able to do what they want to do.
I don't think that if it were, not that it would be legal anywhere to murder people, but I don't think that's the main thing that stops people from being violent, right? I think it's actually that you understand and respect human life. I think that's the fundamental thing. Now, where does that come from? It could come from your religious beliefs, your upbringing, the culture that you're surrounded by, your schooling, informed by the law, all these different things, right? But I think the fact that you're of sound mind. So when I do the thing I see when people do this, whether it's this kind of killing, or these people who go and do mass shootings or terrorism or whatever, I think the thing they have in common is they don't properly value human life, right? They don't value human life in a very special and sacred way. In fact, oftentimes they despise human life, right? They don't think that life, they actually think the opposite, right? They don't think that life is valuable and sacred. They think that, human beings are, some sort of plague.
I really think that we are not aware of how important we are individually in the universe's necessity to express itself through us. And when you don't recognize how important you are to that equation, then you just kind of flippantly look at your life as a happenstance. You don't really recognize the complexities that had to happen in order for you to be born. It wasn't just your mom and your dad got together, they had sex, and then you were born. It is the millions of people that had to meet before your mom and dad were even thought of that had to be born in order for you to be born with the exact cells that you have in your body. If you didn't have exact cells, traits, characteristics, genes, et cetera, you would not be Adrian and I would not be Megan, I'd be somebody else. And that level of significance in your own individuality is so important to the universal mind and God's source, because it is through your experience that God is having a reality. It is through your experience. So when you don't know that, then you don't understand your true value and the level of importance that you have. Thus, you can die. I die for this. You'll die, you'll kill somebody else. It's not a big deal. We have to, as it pertains to this violence, we have to begin to really understand who we are and what we are. Because if you don't understand what you are, then you are not able to really grasp your level of potential.
One of the things I do in my book is I really try to look at the way that Black culture has been shaped positively. So you have a wonderful legacy of what we call Black self-help. This comes from Booker T. Washington, National Negro Business League, Black people supporting one another's economic flourishing, accomplishing amazing things in the face of incredible obstacles. And I think that, as Lincoln and Mamiya say, the womb of Black America is the Black church. And you have a very high view of scripture in the Black church. You have a very specific form of worship, right? A kind of ecstatic form of worship that is specific to Black people, full of Black joy. And so you have wonderful, positive things. I think that the Black church was primarily responsible for the greatest leap forward in literacy in the history of the world that occurred in America between 1865 and 1930, when 80% of Black people could read from almost none.
I'm a Christian, so I tend to root my arguments in a biblical worldview. I hear a lot of Black folk talking about what their ancestors did and did not do and what they want on behalf of their ancestors. And one thing we seem not to want is the faith that got them through some very, very difficult times. And we could use some of that right now. I think it's fine to have some of those other interventions, but ultimately we need people reform, and this across the board, across ethnicity, before we get police reform, right? So I believe, again, as a Christian, like I believe God has given us at least 3 things to restrain evil. Each individual has a conscience. We all have a family. He's given us the church. Again, I'm talking about believers, but let's say for persons not Christian, like religious institutions. And then we have the government. But what the conscience will not constrain, and the family cannot contain, and the church cannot retrain, then the police will have to detain. And the reason that our hair's on fire is because we start with the police. We think that it's their job to keep us from killing one another.
A lot of pastors are afraid to teach the Bible the way it's meant to be taught. They're afraid to preach the things that the Bible says that are controversial in American society. It might be hard for a pastor to say abortion is wrong. So they either say nothing or they just go along with it. I mean, there's been pretty famous preachers, Black preachers, who have said, abortion should be a woman's choice. I'm like, that ain't biblical. But there you have it. I mean, I think that when you stop grounding your worldview on the Bible, especially as a minister, then that leads to a lot of these issues.
And the argument I've made to people is, some of y'all can't even have Thanksgiving dinner go down without 2 uncles getting into a fight or a squabble and having to call the police. So you can't have big self-government, capital S, capital G, until you have little self-government, lowercase s, lowercase g. If a person cannot restrain themselves and their passions and their emotions, then you're always going to have more law and more policy. So I think we get the order wrong in terms of which one has to come first.
I mean, you see cities like Atlanta, they call it the Black Mecca. I mean, Black people are doing very well. People think that Black people live in just inner city neighborhoods. No, I mean, in Atlanta, you got tons of Black people living in the suburbs and building wealth and building that generational wealth. They're not, quote unquote, waiting for white people to stop being racist before they try to get theirs. Now we're seeing more of a resurgence of that, but I think we need to see more of it. And I'm starting to see more Black voices that are emphasizing that rather than just saying, well, we'll just have to fix the government and then that'll fix all of our problems. No, I think they recognize, even if they recognize that there is racism in the system, we can still build something and get over those obstacles.
I mean, I'll tell you what I think is really important. I think that what is considered cool within a culture or a community is extraordinarily important because it allows you to predict its present and its future, right? So say you look at a community and a culture where what's considered quote unquote cool is doing well in school, getting good grades, going to university, entrepreneurship, getting married, having a family, looking after your kids, staying out of trouble with the law, not going like that's considered cool and positive. If you've got a culture, and it doesn't matter the race, the ethnicity, whatever, any of that stuff. If you have a culture where that is what's considered cool, and that's what young people are modeling and mimicking, you're going to have that community, that culture, that group, that social, those people are going to be successful, right? They're going to be successful. You can obviously, if what the average 10-year-old or 15-year-old aspires to are things that are positive and good for themselves, good for the community, and so on, then that's going to be a successful culture. You're not going to have a lot of major problems. If you, on the flip side, if you have a culture or a community or a location or a region where it's considered cooler to go to jail than it is to go to college, or it's considered cool to have a criminal record, or going to school or doing well or working hard in school is considered corny, having a 9-to-5 or a job is considered corny, even being positive or whatever, it's cooler to have 5 baby mamas than to have 5 babies from one mama. If that's the culture, again, you can predict it, right? Why would anyone be surprised that the former one I described is going to be more successful by basically every measure than the latter one?
This art form is like, well, let's go ahead and we're going to get a warehouse and we're going to put the word museum on it. And inside of the warehouse, we just going to have a bunch of dead bodies hanging upside down. You might have an arm over here and you have a head over here. And we're going to have, but this is a form of art. We got blood all over the walls and we got going on in the sound system and all that. Oh no, it's okay. It's a form of art. So at some point, we're going to have to decide as a community what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for the persons and people who are listening to this, and not be able to just say, oh, well, it's music. Music influences. It influences. So you can't just, can't just do that. I will give you the same answer that I have given in a response to the question pertaining to crack in the neighborhoods. Oh, well, the government put crack in Harlem. The government put crack in Los Angeles and so forth and so on. And I'm going to have to say the same thing that I say about guns that just appear in the neighborhood. You don't have to snort the cocaine. You don't have to smoke the crack. And you do not have to pick up the gun and kill each other. You just don't have to. So where they are wrong, where the executives and label owners are wrong, they are wrong for pushing out this type of death through the airwaves. We too are wrong for not saying, no, I'm not going to do that.
And so that's why I think we've got to look at very organic solutions, not top-down solutions, bottom-up solutions that are organic, that bring networks into the neighborhood. Real change is hyper-local. And so you can go block by block and stabilize a block. And we've done that on the Enright Boulevard in St. Louis, where 95% of those kids are going to college and getting jobs. They're not joining gangs. They're not going to prison. And that's a totally different future for them than their older brothers and cousins had. right? It's not even hard to talk them into doing it because they watched what happened, right, to some of their friends. And so I think that those groups are making a huge difference with the people they're working with. The problem is most churches, all welfare programs, right, and most charities are still operating the old way. And so Chicago's a huge city. It's the third largest city in the United States, right? And so you need more than 2 or 3 good organizations working on a few blocks. You need each philanthropic effort to be sort of retrained in their mindset so that they can flip their model, right?
And I think that it's really going to take a movement, or maybe even plural movements, to really say, you know what, we need to take action, we need to activate, we need to get people motivated to get involved in their communities, to demand more from their governments. And this isn't really Democrat or Republican. You can have a Democrat who's tough on crime and wants to, divert resources towards helping Black people build businesses, but it's going to start with us. It has to. I think progressivism has done a hell of a job on the psyche that a lot of Americans but like I said, it's disproportionately impacted the Black community, and we have to realize that the government isn't what's going to solve this problem. It has to be we as a people. I hate to use the word getting angry enough, but yeah, we have to get angry enough at this stuff, because if we don't, then there's not a lot of other things that are going to motivate us to fix the problem.
The only solution is doing what conservatives say that they actually are, and that's to operate as a republic. If you say that this is a republic, if you say that the constitutional republic is worth defending, you need to operate like that. And what that means is local government. The government closest to the people has the amount of power. There is no promise. There is no promise your Republicans can make you at the federal level that is going to change what is happening at the local levels in these communities. There is not a single thing Republicans can do from the federal level that is going to change the crime that is happening in Philly, that is happening in Chicago, that is happening in New York, that is happening in St. Louis, that is happening in New Orleans. Like, you're not going to change that from the federal level. The only way you change that is at the local level, period. And if you're not going to have an opposition force that is willing to go in and to have that fight, then these conversations are nonsensical.
Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger.
If Rihanna sees this, listen, girl, at any given time, I know you're going through a lot right now with the billionaire status. You know what I'm saying? Listen, girl, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. You know what I'm saying? If you want to, come learn how to shoot, we got big black guns over here, girl. You know what I'm saying? Yo, keep that shit in. That's the outtakes.